Welcome to Battletech Legends and Mechs, a short story podcast telling tales from around the Inner Sphere and beyond. Good morning, class, or good afternoon, or whatever the hell it is, wherever the hell you are remotely logging in from. Get in here and grab a seat. This is tutorial section F1 from Professor's History of the Inner Sphere course, and I'm your tutorial leader / lecturer, Marks. No relation to that other guy you may know from ancient Terran history. Which reminds me, last week a few of you elementals took seats in the front row, and I got some complaints, so if I can get anyone who's over 2 meters tall in one of the back or side rows, we'd all appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so this is our first official lecture, and where better to start than May 1st, 3052, on a little planet named Tukayyid that was once described as, quote, of little importance and unlikely to be of any historical interest, end quote. The professor has an entire lecture about this particular speck of dust suspended in a sunbeam, so if you haven't attended that class, go do that first and then come back here because I'm not going to do a fraction of the deep dive that he did. Suffice it to say that there are 3 important factors at play here. Number 1. Tukayyid was Earth-like enough that the clans were willing to use it as a proxy for fighting on Terra itself. Terra was the most heavily industrialized planet anywhere, and the sole planet contained the massive tight shipyards, but more than that, it was a symbol. The seat of the only truly unified interplanetary government was on Terra, and Hans Davian and Melissa Steiner had started the Fourth Accession War there only a few years earlier, in a somewhat overly ambitious attempt to start a second Star League. So fighting for Terra without actually reducing the entire planet to a radioactive cinder, again, was considered a good idea. 2. Tukayyid was already in the way. The clans were slicing through Cretan and Steiner space like it was unoccupied. They stomped on the Free Russelhog League as if the very fact that anything on those worlds had 3 dimensions was an insult to clan honor. Their fleets and mechs were already nearby, and so attacking Tukayyid was really just jumping up the timeline a little bit. The clans were going to do it anyways, why not capture the entire Inner Sphere along with it? And number 3, Comstar followed the proper rules for an actual, honest-to-goodness Bachal. They announced what they would be defending the world with, what the stakes were, and the rules of engagement in a very clan-like manner. They weren't the first to do this, but it was considered a, quote, good thing, and many clans thought it meant that the Inner Sphere was finally realizing the superiority of the clan way of doing war. So, the stage is set. 7 clans bickered and argued internally for the right to land on Tukayyid and do battle against everything Comstar could throw at them. In chronological orders with their arrival on Tukayyid, the clans were Smoke Jaguar, Nova Cats, Ghost Bear, Diamond Sharks, Jade Falcons, Steel Vipers, and eventually 4 days and some odd hours later, Clan Wolf. Among all 7 campaigns, there were triumphs and tragedies, more of the latter than the former from both sides if we're being completely honest, but that's war for you. Each clan was given 2 cities or towns that they had to capture. Comstar would defend, and if they lost control of the city, they would be given a window of opportunity to reclaim it. The Ilkhan, Ulrich Kerensky of Clan Wolf, was in contact with Presenter Marshal Anastasia Vogt, previously known as Frederick Steiner, and they negotiated claims of victory and defeat as the campaign progressed. Sometimes the negotiations were easy, as in the case of the Diamond Sharks, who were encircled and cut to pieces without ever reaching line of sight to any of their objectives. Sometimes the negotiations were murkier, and that brings us to the Green Turkeys and their assault across the Fresno River. Now, before I get into this fully, note that I am but a simple man with the resources and time available to me, both of which are fleeting and limited. I do my best to be accurate, but I will make mistakes, and I can only apologize for that. Additionally, I tend towards being somewhat dismissive of the clans and their society. Partially, this is inherited from the professor, as he has influenced many of my academic opinions on the matter. But I also consider myself something of a liberal thinker, technically a library socialist with ethically hedonistic tendencies, and a culture built on military dictatorships forcing a feudal-era caste system on its population, well, let's just say I'm not a fan. That's not to say the Inner Sphere are all saints, of course. We've got our own fair share of tyrants and villains, and we're happily nuking each other for centuries before the clans showed up. But it's hard to really like the clans, even as I admire many of their accomplishments and their mech designs. Seriously, if I ever get my hands on a bull shark, you'll have to bury me in that thing. All this to say that if I happen to make fun of your favorite flavor of clan, don't take it personally. It's just my own personal opinion, and I freely admit that I am an idiot. Moving on. The Jade Falcons were assigned 2 villages to capture in the agricultural heartland of Tukayyid. Hump Tulip, which is one of the dumbest names for a town I have ever heard, and Ulala, which isn't much better. Hump tulips is apparently an indigenous word meaning hard to pole or difficult to paddle in reference to a river that was notoriously challenging to navigate back on Terra and has nothing to do with either Dutch flowers or fornication. Go figure. Now, I can't pretend to understand why the Falcons bid their forces or the apparent brilliance of how they were allowed to land earlier by saying they wouldn't use their dropships or anything in their landing zone, but what I can say is that, like almost every other clan, they considered the geography of where they were fighting to be irrelevant, and it cost them dearly. Their landing zone was at the southern edge of the Fresno Plains, and the Falcons would have to march north across relatively open farmland to reach their two targets. But before they could do that, they had to cross the Fresno River. The Fresno River is a massive, fast-flowing waterway that is over 250 meters wide at the narrowest point. It rushes down the plain with frenzy, white-capped waters that crash against jagged rocks, throwing up a constant spray of misty vapor. Looking across the flatland of the plains, you might think that the world suddenly ended. Only two bridges cross the river anywhere near the Falcons' objectives: Robin's Crossing near Sexy Time Roses, and Plow Bridge near Ooh La La. For anyone with 7 brain cells to spare, that would give off a few warning klaxons about what the defenders might do in order to prevent huge walking tanks from advancing. But apparently this thought never occurred to the clanners because as their stompy robots were walking across both bridges at the same time, the comm guard detonated them, destroying almost a full cluster of battle mechs in the initial explosion, and then shelling the hell out of anything that was still moving. Let's take a brief moment to talk about clan battle formations. I am a simple historian, and terms like binary, trinary, cluster, and galaxy for the clan military often cause my smooth brain much difficulty. The Falcons committed 3 galaxies to Tukayyid. Each galaxy has about 7 clusters, and so that accounts for a total of approximately 21 clusters. And each cluster had between 15 and 25 battle mechs. That's a total of about 1,200 fighting units, and while they weren't all battle mechs, the majority of them probably were. The clans weren't known for using vehicles or artillery during Tukayyid, but they did have elementals and aerospace assets mixed in there. So let's just say about 1,000 mechs more or less, and leave it at that, with a noteworthy corollary that it may have only been a few hundred or significantly more. The Fresno River bridge assault wiped out a full cluster of mechs with a single button push. In the absolute best case for the Falcons, that's 3 binaries, or 30 mechs. Worst case for them, and it's 5 trinaries, or 75 mechs. Let's estimate 50. That's about 5% of the entire Jade Falcon invasion in one instant. Poof. Gone. And meanwhile, you still have all your forces sitting on the southern bank of the river with artillery falling like rain, aerospace fighters strafing roads and ammo dumps, and PPCs and AC-2 shots blasting anything that gets too close. So what do? The Falcons could go back to the dropships and attempt another landing on the north side of the river, but Comstar was now throwing wave after wave of aerospace fighters at them, so putting all their eggs in 3 fragile, highly kamikazeable baskets seemed foolish. They could march a few hundred kilometers east or west to the next bridges, but who's to say that the moment the mechs stepped on those, Comguard wouldn't blow them up too? For 2 days, the Falcons attempted long-range fire at the entrenched Comguards, lobbing anything that could reach those positions in the hopes of securing one of the bridgeheads to make a pontoon bridge. 2 days of Star Colonels bickering with each other as their troops were whittled down and the entire campaign ground to a halt. Enter Aiden Pride. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about Aiden Pride. There are entire books written about the man in the lead T-bill. Suffice it to say that him and his sister, well, his genetic sister, since Aiden and Martha were both trueborn and an iron womb, they were plenty frustrated by the inability to move forward, and Aiden came up with a daring plan built on pure crazy. See, some light mechs can jump over 150 meters. While the Fresno River is still significantly wider than that, what if you had a bit of stable something about 100 meters into the river? A skilled pilot could run their mech out along that stable, ground-like substance and then jump across to the other side. Once there, the comm guards' entrenched positions could be flanked, and their stranglehold on the river might loosen enough that the Falcons could actually build a bridge. Too bad there wasn't anything big and heavy and stable enough to do that. Oh wait, what if we use these big walking hunks of metal we happened to bring with us? I want you to picture it. Clan Omni mechs, one of the pinnacles of military technology, holding hands with the mech behind it as they marched into the Russian waters. By linking each mech to a chain of mechs, they could slowly, carefully, build a bit of artificial land that stretched into the river. Then Aiden and company would literally walk on the backs of the submerged mechs until they could jump across to the other side. Daring? Yes. Wise? Gods no. but it did work. And what's that old saying? If an idea is stupid and works, then it's still stupid and you got very lucky. Aiden got very, very lucky. I honestly don't know if the mechs that marched into that river were abandoned or how many pilots walked back out afterwards, or if the plan was always to march as far as possible then just eject. None of those sound like good ideas, but regardless, it worked. The breakwater was built on the backs of summoners and mad dogs and anything big, heavy, and lacking in jump jets. Aiden and Martha Pride jumped across with as many mechs as they could and drove the comm guards from their positions. By that afternoon, pontoon bridges were being constructed at both of the sites where the bridges had previously been. And while the bridges were being constructed, Aiden didn't just wait around. He took the Falcon Guard that had crossed with him and headed for Olala. Comstar had rigged the entire town with explosives, but due to an unusual abundance of caution, only a single star of mechs was caught in the trap. The rest of the two clusters fought into town and managed to plant the metaphorical flag on the ruins of their objective. Almost immediately, Comstar redeployed everything they had to Olala, and the Jade Falcons' victory turned Pyrrhic. Wave after wave of mechs, aerospace fighters, and infantry hounded the Falcons until Aiden ordered a fighting withdrawal. They fought Comstar out of the town, back to the pontoon bridges, back across the bridges, across the plains, and back to the doors of the dropships. All the while, Pride took up the rear guard, stalling and killing and running, just trying to buy time. When the last remnants were loaded to get off-world, he had been fighting for over 30 straight hours. The Falcons negotiated a tie, although it's not entirely clear why. Sure, they had held their objective for a few hours, but they lost it almost immediately. And yes, they inflicted jaw-dropping casualties on the defending comm guard, but so did the Novacat, and the Smoke Jaguars were on the doorstep of Jinju Heights when Kerensky negotiated their campaign as a loss. Some say it's because Kerensky didn't negotiate the terms of the Falcons' campaign, but the Falcons' own Khan, Elias Kritchell, struck the bargain. I suspect that Folk was willing to give the Falcons a tie for two reasons. The first is that the longer it took the comm guard to dig out the Falcons, the fewer reinforcements could be redeployed to other, more dangerous fronts. The rapid defeat of Novacat and Smoke Jaguar had allowed divisions to be moved to different fronts, bringing fresh troops and supplies to beleaguered Comstar positions. And as each clan fell, it freed up more resources for the remaining fights. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, I think Folk knew that the Ilkhan hated the Jade Falcons with a passion of 1,000 suns. I think the Presenter Marshal was sowing as many seeds of internal strife as he possibly could, and by giving the Falcons a tie, he was marking the most hated of the Crusader clans as the only even remotely successful one, and setting up decades of conflict between the Green Turkeys and the Puppies. On the flip side, I think the Falcons left in a better state than when they arrived. They were now acknowledged as the most important Crusader clan, especially when the Ghost Bears swapped to being Wardens, and their Khan had a hero who had conveniently died. Sure, having Aiden Pride fight like a clan or god was useful, but such people are dangerous political opponents, especially since Khan Kritchell stayed safely in orbit the entire time. The fact that Aiden died, buried under a weight of numbers as the last dropship launched skyward to safety with his daughter on board, he had done Kritchell 3 good deeds. He gave the Falcons a hero, he died as a hero, and he kept enough of the Falcons' fighting strength intact that they could recover relatively quickly. So there we go. 1/7 of the total Tukayyid campaign drawn to a close, and with a tie. Why did I start with the turkeys? Well, to some extent I think it's because they're an easy mark for being labeled as the bad guys. And I don't know if it's necessarily fair. I'm not saying they're the good guys by any measure, but I do think that we sometimes forget how terrifying they were. They launched an attack across a river that should have been impossible, and were willing to sacrifice hundreds, if not thousands of tons worth of priceless battle mechs to do it. Yes, they eventually fled the planet, but not before claiming a tie, something only one other clan was able to do. I'm not saying they're heroes, but they were terrifying. And sometimes when we imagine them as mustache-twirling villains, we can forget that one of them fought for over 30 hours, unstoppable, striding like an ancient god of vengeance among his enemies, just so his comrades and family could escape. I think that just about wraps it up for this week. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can send a low-cost APG message to marx.battletech@gmail.com. That's marx.battletech@gmail.com, and I will respond in a future episode. Just note that I record a few of these at a time to make sure I stay ahead of the syllabus, so it might take a little bit for me to get to your question. For the next lecture, I think I'll probably spend some time talking about one of my favorite battle mechs, No, it's not the Bull Shark. That's my Grail mech, and I think the production run on those was under a dozen, so I've given up trying to find. Once again, a huge thank you to Catalyst Game Labs for their worthy and generous stewardship of the Battletech IP. It is a continual joy to see what new shinies they release. Also, a big thank you to Joel Morelli for the phenomenal music that I use in these lectures to make things sound a little bit more interesting. Don't get me wrong, I love the sound of my own voice, but it doesn't mean all of you do as well. And a quick thank you to Aaron Hatherhall for the logo. Big fan of it, and those of you who are paying attention might have a hint about the mech that I'm going to be talking about next week. Until then, class dismissed.